Assault Intercessors are frontline assault fighters for the Space Marine chapters in the 41st millennium. They wield chainswords and bolt pistols and charge into the fray with a unfound fury to destroy the enemies of the Emperor. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are doing a unit review of the Assault Intercessors, the plucky frontline troops of the Space Marines. The Assault Intercessors are a relatively recent model kit that just came out last edition, and they are quite a common unit to have given their inclusion in starter sets and Indomitus. Assault Intercessors come in at 75 points for 5 or 150 points for 10. They have 6 inches of movement, toughness 4, a 3+ save, 2 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 2, a fairly standard Space Marine stat line. In terms of ranged weapons, they all come standard with a heavy bolt pistol, which is 18-inch range, 1 attack that hits on 3s, at strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. This is a fairly standard pistol profile, though is pretty good at killing things like infantry and guardsmen. Hand Flamer or Plasma Pistol are the options for an upgraded Sergeant Pistol, and I would say they're both kind of just whichever one you think is cooler. The Hand Flamer is Torrent, ignores cover with D6 attacks, auto hit, obviously, at 12-inch range with strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. Not going to do much to anything but the lightest infantry, but it does look cool. And the Plasma Pistol is 1 attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. Fairly good anti-infantry shooting, and if you overcharge it, it goes to strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2, but you risk blowing up the model with it. I think either of these pistol choices are fine, and just pick whichever one looks cooler. In terms of melee weapons, they all come standard with the Chainsword, which has 4 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. A fairly unassuming profile, but it is very good at killing light and medium infantry. And then the Sergeant can upgrade to a Thunderhammer, which has devastating wounds, 3 attacks that hit on 4s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2, or a Power Weapon or Power Fist. The Power Weapon has 4 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1. Pretty similar to the Chainsword, just improved version of it. And the Power Fist has 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2, very good at smacking Marines and not too bad at damaging light vehicles either. Now where the real power of the Assault Intercessors comes in is their abilities. Their main ability is Shock Assault, which is each time a model in this unit makes a melee attack, you can re-roll a wound roll of 1. Though, if the enemy you're targeting is in range of an objective marker, you can re-roll the wound roll instead. This is a very powerful special rule that allows them to punch up against things on objectives surprisingly well, making them very good objective scrappers, and this of course transfers to any characters that lead them, and given the fact that they're just standard Mark 10 Tacticus armor, most characters can lead them outside of things like Gravis or Terminator characters. In terms of the loadout for the unit, every model is equipped with a heavy bolt pistol and Astartes chainsword. The Assault Intercessor Sergeant can replace his heavy bolt pistol with either a hand flame or plasma pistol. Either option is fine, though the plasma pistol is probably a little better. The Assault Intercessor Sergeant's chainsword can be replaced with one of the following: 1 Thunderhammer, 1 Power Weapon, or 1 Power Fist. The Power Fist is the best option here, in my opinion, though I think the Thunderhammer is also surprisingly good given their reroll wounds, which could allow you to fish for devastating wounds, especially if you have some way to get extra hits off of that weapon. In terms of buffing options, as I mentioned, these guys have a lot, so this is going to be a long section. The Captain is the classic, he loves the rerolls himself, and Assault Intercessors are cheap and still threatening a lot, so they're not too bad of a stratagem target for his free ability. The Apothecary generally prefers to be at range and likes to resurrect models that are pricey, and he doesn't have any melee, so I would not run him with them. The Chaplain gives them +1 to wound, and if you've ever used +1 to wound plus reroll wounds, you realize how devastating that is. I remember that fondly from 9th edition with Blood Angels and Lightning Claws. The Justiciar offers fights first, which is nice, though I'd say that's generally better on a more elite unit that is more likely to very guaranteed destroy models before they get into combat, where these guys would prefer to just get the jump on the enemy. The Ancient can make a big objective control unit, but I generally leave that guy with the company heroes. The Librarian has poor melee and doesn't offer much aside from that, so I would generally leave him at home as the Intercessors like a damage boost. The Lieutenant gives them lethal hits, which is always good, though I'd say he's generally better with a unit that doesn't have an innate wound buff, things like Blade Guard Veterans, for example, though I don't think he's a bad choice here. I just prefer more dangerous bodyguards for my lieutenants. The Tech Marine doesn't usually lead units unless you're in something like Anvil Siege Force, and even if you are, he generally prefers to be leading something that's more shooty, whether that be Devastators or normal Intercessors, for example. Now, we're going to start moving on to the chapter-specific units. The Sanguinary Priest is actually really good in my opinion. He gives them the extra AP that Chainswords really need to deal with 2+ saves, and his Feel No Pain is a solid buff given how cheap these guys are to help them stay on the field. The Blood Angels Captain is the same as a regular Captain, though he's a bit cheaper, so the same stuff applies here. The Castellan and Marshal for the Black Templars are the same as a lieutenant and a captain, so they generally are the same things there. Grimaldus would love to give his buffs to all of these guys, though I'd say Grimaldus might be better with a Sword Brethren unit or a Crusader squad, which can generally do a little bit more damage, especially in the case of the Sword Brethren. Helbrecht is in a similar boat to Grimaldus. He's very good, and the buffs he applies are not bad, though he would definitely prefer Sword Brethren to lead, given that he doesn't offer a direct damage buff. The Emperor's Champion is a fine choice. He's relatively cheap, and his melee is quite powerful, though I'd say he's, again, probably just better with their unique options, though if you're running a small unit, of course, this is your best option. Vulcanistan likes to lead cheap characters just to hand out his buff, or cheap units rather, though I'd say he prefers the heroes of the company. And then Adrex Agatone, their rules overlap, so I would not run them together. He would much be significantly better with Blade Guard veterans. And Uriel Ventress is very similar to Vulcan, where he doesn't really want to be leading the unit he's buffing, so he would generally prefer something like Company Heroes, though these guys would make a fine choice as well. Moving on to the next page, Captain Sicarius is a fine option for a scouting unit for these guys that has quite a bit of melee threat to infantry, but I would say Cato's overpriced, and I would not bring him because he's Cato. Tigurius is a model that doesn't really have a defined point, though if you are using him, he definitely prefers to be with a shooting unit just because his psychic powers are so good at range. Marnius Calgar offers a lot of power, though he already has Twin Linked, and I would say he generally would prefer to be with Aggressors or Blade Guard over these guys, given how big of an investment he is. Grasaro Khan with these guys, on the other hand, I think is really good, as his melee is good, and he gives them Lance, with the reroll wounds, of course, is very powerful. There's a good amount of threat in that very cheap unit. Ragnar offers very good melee damage and advance and charge, and of course Ragnar himself, with his big 10 attacks at strength 8, is very dangerous with those rerolls, so he's definitely a good choice with them. Azrael generally prefers to lead something a little more dangerous, that's generally a little more fragile, whether that be something like Inner Circle Companions for melee or Hellbasters at range, though he's not a bad choice. Asmonai does allow for full rerolls when you're attacking something on objective, though as I mentioned you might prefer Inner Circle for their innate lethal hits. Ezekiel's damage is okay, and his attack boost is handy. I'd say that he's a fine choice for a dangerous midboard unit, especially if Chaos are prevalent in your meta. Lazarus offers very little, and I would not say he's worth bringing unless you're desperate for the Deathwing keyword. In terms of detachments, they're good in a lot of them. In Gladius, they do their job very well. They really love Honor the Chapter for that extra AP and Lance, and Advance and Charge in the Assault Doctrine is very useful on these guys. Anvil is all about big shooting units, though these guys would make a very good screen for those shooting units, and would also be very competent at fighting in the midboard while your long-range shooting stays back, and Ironstorm is much the same, though of course they use mainly vehicles. Firestorm, they do have options to use Crucible of Battle, which is really good, and then Stormlance gives them Advance and Charge, which is super useful for these guys, as they would be very, very effective at jumping from objective to objective to make sure that they stay yours. First Company is a bad detachment, and these guys like the keyword, so I would generally not bring them there. Now we are going to start moving on to the chapter-specific ones. In terms of Righteous Crusaders, they love all the vows depending on the enemy, especially if you can get them, say, against a Psyker with those 4+, they could be very effective against something like a Chaos Knight with the Psyker keyword. Though, as I mentioned earlier, Crusader squads give them a lot of trouble in terms of competition. Liberator Assault Group gives them this great extra strength and attacks, making them strength 6 with 5 attacks apiece, and makes them way more general purpose with those reroll wounds, especially if you can give them +1 to wound somehow. And I would say they're better on objectives than their Death Company variants, which gives them some leverage over those more mighty warriors. Though in Lost Brethren, for example, they don't have any support there, and you're going to want to be running a lot of Death Company, and by extension, a lot of Chaplains to make sure they're all good on objectives, so I wouldn't say they have too much use in that detachment compared to the Liberator Assault Group, where I think they are absolutely fantastic. Now, there are many more detachments to cover on this next slide. The Angelic Host generally don't struggle on objectives, though still, since the jump pack units will be jumping on and off the board, I'd say these guys make a fine unit to simply camp in the mid-board and keep those objectives safe. Unforgiven Task Force buffs are already mediocre, and they tend to slant more towards shooting, and I would not say there's much reason to bring these guys in that detachment, mainly because that detachment just isn't very good. In terms of Inner Circle, they can gain the Inner Circle Task Force keyword from their leaders, and +1 to a wound on objectives with rerolls is super powerful, though I'd say with Knights and Companions being as good as they are as frontline fighters, they generally aren't wanting for more frontline melee combatants, and I'd say normal Intercessors could be more potent for the objective game just given their general sticky objectives abilities. And Ravenwing is similar to the Inner Circle, though they cannot get any buffs here as they have no Ravenwing characters to lead them, and Black Knights are already quite mighty in the midboard, especially with the command squad, so I can't really say there's much use in these guys outside of standard grunts, which they do fine, but then again, normal Intercessors can offer that sticky objectives. In terms of Champions of Rust, the Space Wolves detachment, which has all of the different sagas, I would say all of the sagas are good for them, though they definitely prefer Warriorborn and the Beast Slayer, giving them those buffs to help them punch up against heavier units, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, I'd say this guy with Ragnar Blackmane is honestly a fantastic unit, just because Ragnar offers so much melee, and he would be a great choice to complete some of those sagas, especially the one that revolves around you destroying enemy models with your characters. Though I wouldn't say there's any detachments where these guys are bad, they just are sometimes more outshined by more exotic options. In terms of main competitors, Intercessors offer those sticky objectives, as I mentioned, which makes them a little bit more solid on the objective game. However, the Assault Intercessors do defend their points a little bit better, so they're very well balanced, I'd say, where the Assault Intercessors aren't quite as potent on taking objectives, though they're better at defending and attacking them, though the Intercessors are useful to get them sticky. In terms of the Crusader squads, you do get more models for a little bit cheaper technically, though of course Assault Intercessors can be taken in smaller units, though they do hit less hard than the Black Templars Crusader squads. The Space Wolves Grey Hunters offer very similar damage output, but they do get to bring some ranged weapons as well, which is certainly interesting, though I would say Assault Intercessors are much better, and Blood Claws are kind of like a worse version of Black Templar Crusader squads. Not only can they not get as big, they generally don't have as many good buffs or leader options, so I would leave them to other things. Assault Intercessors are better, in my opinion, though I'm not the most competent Space Wolves player. In terms of best use, Assault Intercessors are a very simple unit. They've got their pistols, they've got their chainswords, and they charge at the enemy to fight things. That's not unusual for Marine units. Marines are made and were especially remade with the Primaris update to be as simple to use as possible. They fight really hard on objectives, which is what you'll want your battle line models doing, and offer a great buff to anyone who wants to lead them, with maybe the exception of Adrax Agaton. Though in some factions, whether that be Black Templars, Space Wolves, or something like Dark Angels, some more exotic options will come to the head, though I don't think these guys will ever be a bad choice. They are just sometimes less interesting to take than the other ones. In terms of raw objective power, I think Intercessors slightly edge them out, but as I mentioned earlier, Assault Intercessors defend the points they take significantly better. Unfortunately, there just isn't that much to say about Assault Intercessors. They're useful grunts that are hard to go wrong with, as they should be, but it's pretty simple. Strap a Power Fist onto the Sergeant and send them hurtling into the midfield, maybe with a character along, and they will fight with an unmatched ferocity to defend the righteousness of the Emperor, and in general will do you very well. They get their job done very well, and while they won't be ripping down huge vehicles all on their own, with certain buffs they definitely can, whether that be something like a Chaplain in something like Liberator Assault Group, where they most definitely can bring down those huge heavy vehicles. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.